I heard, Bradley, that you think chief procurement officers are control freaks.
Rumor has it.
Oh, rumor has it. Okay. Do you believe that that control freak helps us identify risks?
I'd like to think of it as they're more focused on the details.
Okay. All
And that
right. So
certainly
it's a
helps with
good
risk.
thing.
Absolutely.
It's a good thing. Okay. Bradley, pastor, right?
Yes.
VP North America Sales at Risk Methods.
Correct.
You have 20 years of experience in enterprise technologies.
Correct.
And you have an opinion, and I am looking forward to understanding more about why you believe that it's a good thing to be a control freak, because I'm certainly one. So welcome to the stage, Bradley.
Thank you. All right, so I believe I'm the person before lunch, which is probably only surpassed by the person before the cocktail hour. So we'll go through this. So in terms of putting together the presentation for today, it had me thinking one thing, which I'm spending a significant amount of time on lately, which is my 16-year-old daughter who is getting her driver's license. So when you think about how to get control when you're out of control, how many of you have gone through having a child get their driver's license? Okay, so it is absolutely just like, it's everything, right? So you want to be able to convey that you have some control over it because you're the parent, you're cool and you're calm and you're driving the car and it's totally fine, but you're completely just freaked out. But you don't want to convey that you're freaked out to them because you're like, oh my God, drive safely. And then they're like, I'm going fine, Dad. And and then once she gets her license or your son gets her license, then you have the aspect of, now they go. So we have 3 children, my wife works, and we're always like, oh my God, we can't wait till she drives because now she can carpool and drive the other kids around, but then, oh my God, she'll have our other 2 kids around. We always joke that if we lose one, well, we got 2 more, and we'll get through it, and our kids really appreciate that. But have me really thinking in terms of, how do you get control when you're out of control? It's all relative, right? So what does control mean? What does out of control mean? What do we do to mitigate that? And the way I mitigate it in terms of with my daughter is, how do I identify, assess, and mitigate the risk associated with her driving? And mostly my insecurity about her driving, because she's fine. Left to her own devices, she'd be tooling around, and I would be in complete panic around that. So, there we go. So what does it actually mean as we go through it? It's a great quote. A lot of people have heard this quote, but really fundamentally, it's those of us who are most adaptable to change are the ones that are going to be effective on it. So if I think again about Caroline driving, the more that I can adapt to her growing up, then the easier it is for all of us, right? It's my issue. It's not her issue as we look through it. But there's a lot of things that impact our ability to exert control. You just heard from the presentation before, there's a long litany of both known and unknown and real and not real factors that can impact it. So I love this acronym, the VUCA world. So what's volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous? The pressure to innovate, pressure to cut costs, right? And all these things sometimes are at odds with each other. We want to innovate, we want to put more in R&D, but we're dependent upon suppliers, we're dependent upon the supply chain to do that. But at the same time, we need to cut costs, right? But then there's all these other things that go on in the world. So I was reading some news this morning, and the Fed sort of cut rates, but then they didn't cut rates, and then they thought they did, and that's been, like 3 hours in terms of that. So you think about these things, and they're all, and remote controls impact our abilities or control. There we go. All right. So it's really, your supply chain competes with other supply chains. It competes with itself. So you have a relationship with a tier 1 supplier. You think everything's great. You think everything's wonderful, but then they could go work with someone else, and that impacts yours. They could be acquired, and now all of a sudden they don't want to do business with you. So how are you going to be able to, again, exert that control over an area where you really don't have? Our proposition, and what we hear from our clients and customers all the time, is that a reliable supply chain gives you control over the unknown. So the same way that I want to identify, assess, and mitigate risk when I drive with my daughter, we want to be able to identify what's the potential risk in our supply chain. We want to be able to assess what that is, and then ultimately mitigate that. And that's going to be different for every organization, right? Some organizations have a really high tolerance for risk. Some organizations have a low tolerance for risk. And hopefully, the rest of us are somewhere in between. So we already know this. Your supply chain is vulnerable. I'm not telling anyone you don't know. But just to reiterate, I mean, there's fires, there's explosions, there are, I love this one, McDonald's lost revenue. I don't know if that's because they introduced, the super duper Big Mac or, people actually went on strike. And then there's reputational incidents that occur all the time. I would argue that the reputational one is probably the hardest to recover from. You know how to rebuild something that catches on fire, people went on strike, United Auto Workers are striking now with GM. It's highly disruptive, both to those people and to the economy, but I think we all know it'll get resolved. It's a question of when. But your reputation gets a hit. I mean, people still talk about, when you think about cyber incidents, TJX, right? How long has that been? And it turns out it really wasn't even TJX's fault, but no one thinks of the HVAC vendor that left the internet-enabled device open that was hacked into it. Everyone still thinks of TJX, right? How are they going to recover? Experian, right? How many people feel comfortable about their credit reports? Getting that information. So reputational risk and the impact of your supply chain through, that's probably more difficult to manage. So what if you're better able to prevent similar impacts, and how would you do that? What would you do with that increased control inside your organization, right? So one of the ways to think about it is, what's your level of preparedness? So most people are familiar with these things. Down here is bad, up here is good on a relative. But being able to get more information. So how many organizations already do some level of, you do financial due diligence on your vendors, right? Everyone does. You get a D&B, you get some sort of credit rating on it. You probably have some sort of questionnaires, some sort of assessments that you do internally, right? And how's that all managed? It's spreadsheets, it's through relationships you have. We have some clients that say, look, we only need to focus on these handful of suppliers because the other ones, we've been doing business with them for 50 years. Like, we don't have anything to be concerned about. I would put forth that those are the ones you should probably be more concerned about, right? Those handshakes, those nods, third generation family business. Yeah, my grandparents set up the relationship, everything's fine, it's the way we do business. To where ideally where you want to go, and the customers, and actually even the prospects that come to us, they're looking at this. So they have digitized supply chains, they want to have predictive insight into it, they want to use things such as machine learning, artificial intelligence to sort of bubble up what's either a leading or lagging indicator, then how can they use that? One of the downsides potentially for organizations is that you then just get tons of stuff, right? Oh, we're going to use Google Alerts, we're just going to push stuff to us. But then you have to sift through, and then what's important, what's not important, then how can you sort of make that determination for your organization? Ultimately, the more prepared you are, the more control that you have in an organization. So based upon us working with our clients, and we continually poll our clients and poll our prospects, we're running an event in Munich, and we're also running an event in Boston, just purely around supply chain risk. We open it up to the public, everyone's allowed to come, and what we find when we poll people, it's organizations that are risk aware, organizations that are able to react faster, and organizations that are proactive. It's less about the technology you use, right? It's about making sure you're in those elements. So, do we believe there's a risk? Yes or no? Very simple question in terms there. If we believe that there's a risk, how would we react faster? So what's the mitigation plan, right? How many people does business continuity management fall underneath your purview? Okay, a handful, right? But I would think business continuity management would probably be critical for at least procurement to have a seat at that table to understand it, right? And where it impacts. And then ultimately, how are you proactive, right? What's the business impact? What is this? Is it an economic one? Are there different decisions? Is it geopolitical? So it's all great for Business Insider or Bloomberg.com to put forth and say, oh, wow, everyone's moving out of China, but where are you going to go? Oh, we're going to go to Vietnam. Well, great. You're not going to create a new manufacturing facility and a new supply chain overnight. And then even if you make that investment, what is that, 5 years down the road? What happens potentially if there's instability there, and how is that going to impact it? We're 2 years away from an election in the US. How is that going to impact it? So just being able to say, oh, we're going to go ahead and do something, it doesn't necessarily resolve what you're looking for. So most of the organizations, again, that we talk to, they really like the ability to visualize where the information is, right? So what's our supply chain? Where are the things coming from? It's one thing, I'm a very visual person, so when people, I'm the Gantt chart sort of person when you get a spreadsheet. I like pie charts and all that. It's really hard for me to visualize the numbers, right? So if someone says, all right, here's where a risk is, and you get a spreadsheet, and I'll just click on the tab on the 60 megabit Excel file and wait for that to open up, it doesn't help me. Like I can't get a handle on that. For me, I want to be able to go and look and see where it is, right? In the old days, and I'm of that age, there used to actually be a map, and you would actually put a pin in it, right? And we don't do that anymore. But that's a way where you can interact with the information. And then once you're able to visualize the information, what about a risk scorecard? So how many of you do risk scorecards? Okay, it's a handful of them, right? And what do you look for? You look for you probably have a set of questionnaires you go through, you try to evaluate it. You might put some things have greater risk than other things on them, so you sort of do some weighting on it. But it gives you really an objective way to look at what are your suppliers, right? Okay, here's, based upon this set of criteria, this subset of information, here's where we're gonna look at it. And then also, if you're able to combine that with real-time information on it, it provides another layer, right? So if you have a map and you can visualize where your suppliers are and what's the impact, if you're able to put it against a risk scorecard, so this is where our risk tolerance is, companies that we work in a supply chain might be based upon, maybe they're really critical suppliers, maybe it's a geopolitical risk, weight them in there, and then ultimately if things occur, let's get an alert based upon that information, right? And if you're able to do that, then you can really get a handle on what are your critical suppliers, right? So not, as I gave you, the family business, 3 generations, oh, don't worry about these people. Maybe if you run it through the filter, there could be a lot of concern there, right? Maybe it's the only supplier in that business. Maybe the reason why you have a great relationship with them after 3 generations is you're their only customer, right? And they could immediately go out of business. And then being able to get the analytics to be able to get that information out of it, right? So the challenge with data, of course, is data is subject to people's opinions, right? 2 dots make a line. And being able to figure out where that goes is one thing, but be able to get information that represents it up. And then finally, as asked a few minutes ago, in terms of business continuity plans, what's your ability to mitigate, right? So can you identify the risk? Can you assess the risks quantitatively? And then can you mitigate the rest? So here's a couple examples of customers where they are able to leverage our platform. So Dana, one of their favorite features is to be able to visualize a world map. So Chris, sort of aligned mentally like me, likes to be able to look at a TV or online monitor and say, all right, here's where my risk is. I can get a visualization around there. There's, I think, 5 hurricanes right now in the Atlantic, right? So, okay, I can see where they're coming. Stockmeyer, the ability to alert the information. So a different visualization of this, and I apologize for the line cutting through here, but they had a refinery that was on fire. They got the notification off of our platform before their actual refinery notified them. And then they made the decision to make some changes on it and be able to implement a business continuity plan around there, right? Rorick, again, proactive. So how are they going to go ahead and evaluate a risk scorecard? Here's a visualization. I'm sure if you use Excel or something, you're able to get some of the similar data. So, where do we fall? No action all the way up to high action terms there and being able to get a handle on that. So in wrapping up just a minute or two in terms of what we do, we give you the ability to identify, assess, and mitigate the risks inside your environment. In closing, a little bit of a quick, what else that we do in terms of it? Best of class, easy activation. For most of our clients, we can be up and running inside 3 days. So one of the challenges that we hear quite often is we as an organization, we're not going to implement something like this because it's going to take too long. It's going to take too much of a challenge to get a handle on it. So we're going to defer that. We're going to defer and we're going to defer and we're going to defer and we're going to have other projects. But the ability to do it quickly, rapidly, helps you, again, give you the ability to identify, assess, and mitigate. That's it.
I didn't even have to do this.
I know. I was trying to be respectful there. I was trying to mitigate your risk. So happy to answer any questions that anyone has in terms there, or we can go to lunch.